Hey everybody. So I've been wanting to have more of a discussion video with you covering a few things in the beta and what we can kind of expect and anticipate and kind of, I guess, the attitude and behavior that we should have going into Shadowlands. And this is, I say a discussion video because I want to hear from you, as somebody who's doing a lot of testing in the beta, it really helps me to understand where Feral should be when I listen to a lot of the community, and I can hear what you guys and gals are thinking about things to do with Feral. So recently on my stream, I had a conversation specifically with a couple individuals. Gabon and Larka Wolf were quite passionate about this conversation, but a few others as well, where we mentioned about the place of Feral Druid and how it has no utility and how other specs are outperforming us and Boomkin is better and DH is better and all that kind of stuff, and how we need leader of the pack and we need innovate and we need trends and we need all of these things to our toolkit to make us viable, to make us, wanted and desired. Now, I'm going to preface this video by saying that I don't think that Feral Druid is in a bad spot. I think that we definitely peaked in BFA during Eternal Palace. That patch, what was that, 8.2, I believe? I think we peaked then, just before people got corruption gear. That's when we were at our strongest. That's when, the Hunter and the Mage meta hadn't been evolved yet, and those two specs are obviously out of control. I don't think we've seen anything else do quite as much damage comparable to the rest of the characters in the game, or the rest of the specs in the game, as we have now with those two specs. Rogue and DH were very strong earlier on in the expansion, but things kind of leveled out in EP, for me at least, and I felt a lot more comfortable kind of going up against those specs. But Feral feels pretty good. We've got a single target bleed, we've got an AoE bleed, we've got an AoE finisher bleed, we've got a single target builder, a single target, or an AoE builder, and we have a single target finisher. We have a lot of things in our DPS rotation. Yes, Berserk is pretty dog shit, but, we can get into that at a later date. But all in all, we kind of have a pretty solid toolkit. We've got a lot of utility. Being a Druid, we have a lot of utility. I'm going to get DC'd again, aren't I? Yep. This is the classic. So I already feel like we're in a very good state utility-wise, right? And I see a lot of people saying, oh, well, we need Trent and we need Innovate and we need Leader of the Pack to be desirable. And I really don't think that that is fully the case. In my view, right, Feral Druid has a lot of utility. A lot of utility. And some people say to me, yeah, but DH has more utility, DH is more desirable. That was one of the comments that was kind of brought up. And I see where people are coming from with that and thinking that DH is more desirable because of utility, but it's not that DH has more utility, it's that DH has more unique utility. Feral Druid doesn't actually offer any unique utility going into Shadowlands comparable to the other Druid specs. If anything, we have the least amount of utility of any of the Druid specs, comparable with Guardian Druid. Resto and Balance have now gained Stampeding Roar. That's made us made us a little bit weaker, etc., etc. So our unique utility is actually kind of lacking. Now, I think, and instead of what I think the fix should be, I'll kind of get into more of the issues, I think is the best way to do this. I think a lot of people are also calling for Leader of the Pack as the way to save us, but I think that kind of opens up into a wider conversation of how much should we have, like how valuable should Feral be? How good should we be? How good do we deserve to be in the game? And I guess it depends on your viewpoint and where you're coming from, right? So if you only care about Feral, right, that's all that you care about, then you're going to say, well, Feral should have all of these things. It should have all of these things and it should have damage, because I want Feral to be taken to raids, I want it to be taken to Mythic Plus, and I want it to be taken in Arena. So I want all of these things without question, right? Which is where I've found a lot of people seem to be. They want Feral to be that strong. But I look at it more so as a case of, well, yes, I am Feral, but I'm also a Druid, and I need to be aware of that when discussing how good Feral should be, because if you need to understand where you are in the spectrum to then understand where your limitations are and where your strengths are, right? So if you look at Feral in terms of being a druid, well then Druid as a whole is very well represented. It's one of the most played classes in the game. I think it's like top 2, top 3 or something most played classes in the game. It has 4 specs with 3 separate roles. Technically you could split melee and range DPS into 2 separate roles, kind of, if you really wanted to. I know I separate them out, but you can heal, tank, you can DPS, right? So Druid as a whole has a lot going for it. As a class, we have tons of utility. We have battle res, we have roots, typhoons, we have stealth, we have movement speed increases that are very strong. We have hibernate, we have, did I say soothe already? We have a single target stun if you're playing feral. We have innovate, and we have trance, and we have very strong defensives if you're playing feral or guardian. We have a lot of things, and I'm probably missing some there. That's just me reeling off a whole bunch. We have a lot of things. We have Dispel, Poison and Curse Dispel. We're going to get access to Cyclone going into Shadowlands. Like, Druid has a lot of things, right? But like I say, comparing it Feral to Resto, well, Resto's better in terms of utility. Comparing it to Boomkin, well, Boomkin brings more. And I think that this is where the issue is. Feral has a lot of utility when compared to its competitor, which is if you have a Resto Druid in your Mythic Plus group, or if you have a Rogue, then that's where Feral Druid kind of brings nothing then, right? If you have neither of those classes or those specs in your group, then suddenly a Feral Druid is very valuable, right? Depending on your healer comp and whatnot, Feral Druid is very, very valuable. But it's once you get rid of these things, or it's once you add these things, Resto Druid, which is likely to be very strong, and once you add the Outlaw Rogue, that suddenly Feral Druid becomes a lot weaker. But I don't think the answer is to give us something like Leader of the Pack, because in my view, if you have a 20-man raid, right? If you have a 20-man raid, and you give Feral Druid Leader of the Pack, well, currently in a 20-man raid, melee spots are very, very far and few between, right? Like, they're very... what's the word? Contested. Couldn't think of the word. The melee spots are very contested. You normally have a DH as a melee. You normally maybe have a warrior for warrior buff. You potentially have a monk somewhere in your group for the monk buff. You have potentially a rogue to do some of the immunity mechanics, right? Or you potentially have a couple rogues. That's become less of a feature as we've kind of progressed further and further through the game, but it's still kind of prevalent. And so, if you then say, right, well, Feral Druid gets Leader of the Pack, that means that we are pretty much going to be guaranteed taken to the raid. 3%, 4% crit for everybody in the raid, I think would secure us 100% a spot in the raid. And I don't think that is necessarily fair to all of the other melee specs. What about Survival Hunter? What about like Rep Paladin? What about oh god, I'm struggling to think of all the other melee. What about Enhanced Shaman? There are all these. What about Windwalker? Like, there are all these other melees that aren't guaranteed a spot. So why would we then say, oh well, Druid already performs super well, or like Boomkin already performs super well in most raids, and has been taken, in BFA, I think it was pretty much taken to almost every raid tier, right? So Boomkin's very strong there. Resto Druid is very strong in Mythic Plus, and I guess a mix of those specs are actually pretty good in PvP as well. And Guardian, because it's a tank, is always very, very desirable because tanks are in short supply. So even if Guardian isn't the best in-slot tank in the world, getting a good tank is always going to be a good thing. So just being a good tank as Guardian is fine. So if you're then guaranteeing that Feral is taken to the raid in a 20-man raid with 36 specs in the game, Feral should be guaranteed to be taken, because that's what would happen. And so that's why I think Leader of the Pack, either you add it and it makes Feral OP and required, or you nerf it to the point where it's dog shit useless and it wouldn't matter anyway, right? And in a 5-man party group, that's even more contested, because then you only have 3 DPS specs. And if you're going to say, right, well, we need a rogue to do blah, 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 all the rogue mechanics, which are probably still going to be desired, And then we bring, let's say, I don't know, let's say we bring a hunter, let's say BM hunter, sure, whatever. Bring a BM hunter. Oh, and now we have to bring a feral because that's going to give us our 3% crit that we want. That's going to, make the whole group a lot smoother and whatever, right? Now, obviously, there are other specs in the game that have buffs, so I'm not saying that feral would 100% be taken in a party situation, but it damn near guarantees its spot in a raid environment, and I don't think that's necessarily fair in terms of class representation, because I think as a class, druids are already pretty well represented. But I digress. I think adding Innovate and Trends could be a nice solid solution because it makes us in line with the other druid specs, but it doesn't, make us overpowered in any aspect. It makes us more balanced with balance, which would be very nice, and then it's kind of a case of, oh, we want a druid DPS, and that's a lot. That's a lot of a smoother setup. It's a lot easier for Blizzard to balance around 12 classes being represented than to think of 36 specs being represented in each of these little corridors of content, right? So I think that would make us a lot more well-rounded with the group. I don't think Leader of the Pack is necessarily the answer, and yeah. In terms of going into more so with that representation in terms of, feral and how strong it should be. A lot of people compare us with Rogue, which I think is pretty fair. And I think feral can never be stronger than a Rogue. It just cannot be stronger than a Rogue. And I never used to think this way, but then somebody in stream one day kind of changed my mind and made me go, you know what? Yeah. You're right, feral cannot be stronger than Rogue. And the reason I say this is because Rogue only has 3 specs, and they're all the same. They're all melee DPS, right? Feral has the fallback of a ranged DPS, or a healer, or a tank. So if Feral's not performing very well, and you say, hey, well, I'm a Druid player. I'm a Druid, right? I see myself as a Rogue, right? And you identify as that, then let's say Assassination Rogue is the best rogue spec in the game. Let's just say, for the sake of ease, in all areas of content, let's say Assassination Rogue is hands down the best spec in the game, or the best rogue spec. And let's say it's still trash. Let's say it's nerfed into the ground. It's awful. What other alternative do you have as a rogue player? If Assassination is bad, or if it's just not as good as Feral, which, I mean, in my mind, we're both combo point classes, we're both stealthies, we're both, energy builders, right? We should be in some way comparable. And actually, Feral is kind of an off-split from what Rogue is. Rogue is the pure class. Feral is the, the hybrid-y kind of Rogue type class. Just like a balanced Druid is kind of like the off-split or the offshoot of what a mage is. It's like the alternative, where you should never kind of really be as strong, right? Well, if Feral Druid was stronger than Rogue, then Rogue players don't really have anywhere to go. They'd have to kind of re-roll, which a lot of people don't feel good about that because they identify as that class, and I think people are a lot more welcome to say, hey, I'm playing my class, this spec of mine isn't very strong right now, that's okay, I'll play this spec instead, because I still get to play my main character, I've had this character since day one, blah blah blah, they can still progress with that. But I think that, who's this guy? Hey buddy. But I think as a Feral, let's say Feral's not very good, well hey, you still have Boomkin or Resto or Guardian to fall back on, and you have the alternative in a different role to still play this character. And I know a lot of people say, well, hey, I see myself as a Feral, not as a Druid. So that's fine, let's have that discussion. What is it that is more important? And I think that can help us in balancing these specs a little bit. Because I truthfully don't, a lot of people call for balance and they say, Blizzard, balance the game, balance the specs. The specs aren't balanced. And I think in a realm where players are going to jump through 1,000 islands to get a 1% DPS increase to make them better than the next guy, or to make them able to beat that boss or that dungeon or whatnot. The Andy Brews farming leech gear for 9 hours a day or more in all of the Mythic Plus, you know, dungeons in the game. I was there for Total Gore, Andy. I was there. It's players are willing to do these things in order to get these tiny little tiny insignificant changes that then stack up to being quite significant in you know, when all mounted up together. In a realm where players and the community is willing to do that, and they're willing to say, hey, what is best in slot class? It is this is best in slot class. Me bring this to my key now for my +10 weekly. In a realm where that's what's happening, I don't think Blizzard can balance these specs, but hopefully they can do a lot better job of balancing all the classes. And so I think we need to kind of be more fair in that. I truthfully don't feel like Feral needs to be overpowered. I think Feral is in a fine position. On the beta, we still don't have access to our legendaries yet, so still time will tell with that. We don't have our conduits. These things had a lot of power. I was doing some dungeons, and if you may have seen these other videos and stuff that I've been putting up of Mythic Plus, we're doing decently well based on the fact that our abilities are still a little bit kind of janky. I am working on a document that I'm gonna hopefully be like, you know, sending out into the ether about my experiences with Feral during beta, and you guys and gals can all contribute to that. Please do. I've been doing it in stream lately, but we still got a ways to go on the beta with Feral, but I don't think we're too far off the mark. I think we're okay. I think we're fine. And like in BFA right now, I mean, there's almost a 6K Feral Druid. So no one can sit there and tell me, oh, well, Feral's trash, when it's doing 27, 28 keys, which are some of the highest keys in the world, in the game, and there's a Feral Druid doing that. And I, in my own experience, I've been doing 20, you know, I've got 25s or more almost every key. I've done some 26s. Like, Feral's fine, you know? It's just not the best spec in the game, and I think that's okay. And I think it's okay that that's the case. But let me hear more of your thoughts. What do you think? I want to know where you think Feral should be, what its position should be, whether you think spec balance is more important, or spec representation is more important than class representation, or maybe vice versa. Get at me in the comments. Let me know what you think. And as always, if you want to stop by the stream, twitch.tv/sidebestslat, then you can get involved in the beta discussion. You can help us do better. The way I see it is, you could come into my stream and go, oh man, Feral's DPS looks terrible. Oh no, it's the end of the world. I'm not going to play it. And that's not going to help anything. What we need to do right now is we need to play the spec, get a lot of data, give that data to Blizzard, and then they can look to balance from there and hopefully do a good service, or do it a just service on that one. But anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this discussion video. See you in the next one.